Welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She is the founder and the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is March 26th, 2025. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. You can send your questions to Helga via email. Send them to schillerinstitute.org, questions@schillerinstitute.org, or post them on the chat page. Well, we got a lot to cover today, Helga. There are talks continuing between the United States and Russia towards achieving peace in Ukraine, and conferences going on throughout Europe trying to keep the war going in Ukraine. I think we shouldn't make the mistake of ignoring developments in Southwest Asia, though. So let me start with several questions about the heightened danger of a regional war breaking out and possibly world war from there. The first comes from a peace activist from the United Kingdom, who writes, with demonstrations of 100,000 people in Israel on Saturday against Netanyahu, and anger over his firing of the head of Shin Bet, his refusal to meet with family of hostages, and his decision to break the ceasefire agreement, is there a chance that he may be removed by the people of Israel?
I think that is not to be excluded, because apparently the demonstrations are gathering steam. But I think, the immediate danger is really that the whole conflict, could really go into a wider Middle East war with the US attacks on the Houthis in Yemen, which is a reaction to what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. And then it seems that, the Iran policy is what is the most worrisome. It seems that, there is a certain, influence by Netanyahu on Trump's policy towards Iran. The letter which Trump wrote to Khamenei was, mixed, but it had a lot of provocative tones, which does not go over well in Iran, given the fact that there is still this fatwa that Iran is not intending to build any nuclear weapons because this is against the Islamic religion. Nevertheless, there is an accusation, where basically Trump seems to make an ultimatum that Iran has to get rid of all nuclear technology. It's not totally clear if that also completely implies the civilian aspect, which would violate the sovereignty of Iran completely. But I think the most worrisome right now is that according to open source intelligence, there is right now a deployment of B-2 stealth bombers from the United States and various US bases around the world to the Indian Ocean-based Diego Garcia. And also, I think altogether 2 US aircraft carriers are in the region. Now, that, if it would be, in the direction of what some sources are mooting, intelligence sources, analysts from the region who are experts on the region, that this is pointing in the direction of a decapitation strike against Iran. Now, if that, I'm only saying these are scenarios are being putting out, but the military deployment to Diego Garcia seems to be real. If this blows up, it could completely ruin everything positive Trump has been doing so far with Russia. Because if there would be such a US, maybe Israeli-US attack on Iran, then, that would completely ruin the steps taken in Riyadh, where certain, positive signs have been made that the conflict around the Black Sea can be settled peacefully, and that both Ukrainians, Russians, and Americans seem to be on, making little steps of progress forward. But I can only voice utmost alarm about what is going on in the Middle East. I think we are sitting on a complete powder keg, and I think that this is really extremely dangerous, because one little more incident, like some terrorist attack, some Reichstagsfire kind of, creating facts on the ground, and we could indeed have an escalation of no return.
Well, we do have a question on that. Someone said, if Trump openly supports an Israeli attack on Iran, what would that do to the normalization of ties between Russia and the United States? Is it possible that this is the strategy coming from London to turn Putin against Trump and break the cooperation?
That question is already the answer. Yes, I think that's it, because, you can see very clearly that, with the very promising steps in the direction of cooling down and hopefully settling the Ukraine crisis, there are clear signs that the British, Keir Starmer, Secretary of Defense Healy, Macron, and others in Europe are not agreeing to this settlement, and they, form what they call a coalition of the willing, with the doublespeak saying that they will continue to send weapons and equipment to Ukraine to secure Ukraine even after the end of the war, with always, the idea of keeping the conflict going. So this coalition of the willing is clearly designed not to support the peace efforts between Trump and Putin, but to do the opposite, to keep supplying weapons. And this is absolutely terrible. This has caused a major, I would say, strategically important reaction by Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, who made an amazing, sharp speech by basically saying that what certain Europeans are doing right now is in the tradition of Napoleon and even Hitler, that their talk about causing a strategic defeat for Russia is exactly in this tradition. And, this goes back to the Crimea War, he doesn't say it in this speech, but it has been mentioned before, Lord Palmerston, and the idea to completely, take Russia apart into many pieces. And indeed, if one looks what von der Leyen is doing with her Rearm Europe policy, which she is now renaming, but I think it's really extremely worrisome, and I'm really extremely alarmed about what is going on in Europe at this moment.
We have another question from Los Angeles. Someone writes in and says, "Hi, Harley and Helga. I heard you say yesterday that a British admiral threatened to incinerate 40 Russian cities. Has there been a backlash against him in the UK, or is it now acceptable for military officers to make such provocative statements?" And then the same person asks, "Are there any voices in opposition emerging in Germany to Mr. BlackRock, Friedrich Merz, and his outrageous military budget?"
Well, I think in the United Kingdom there is a backlash. There are demonstrations going on, and I think in Germany, this is so unbelievable what happened. The way how the new parliament was basically outwitted, or rather Merz, who won the election by promising he would not touch the debt brake. The moment he was voted, said, no, the situation has changed. Then he goes into what analysts are calling the financial bazooka in Germany, which is unleashed. Handelsblatt said that the amounts of money which have been, basically unleashed now is 1.7 trillion euros, and no cap. This can always be enlarged. This has led to a situation where yesterday the new parliament was seated, and immediately the AfD is now 1% higher at 23%. The CDU went 1% lower. So there are only 4% between them. And one can, if it sinks in the population, what is happening right now, that, there is an unbelievable military spending program unleashed in Germany, which can only be financed, by money created outside of the regular budget, which has reminiscence of what Hjalmar Schacht did with the MEFO bills. And, you know, what people are really waking up to slowly and not, you know, rubbing their eyes and not wanting to believe it, but it sinks in, is, you know, that once you go on such a path of militarization, you know, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and eventually it will lead to war. Now, this is totally crazy because, you know, I mean, first of all, the whole thing is based on the narrative that Russia is intending to attack a European country, that Putin intends to re-establish the Soviet Union, that he's basically intending to gobbling up the entire Ukraine, then attack Poland, then the Baltic states, and then even another EU member. Nothing of that is proven. It's just pure propaganda. There are top military experts who warn against this insanity. Ted Postol, who is one of the top experts on nuclear weapons worldwide, he not only made a very important speech just 2 days ago in Berlin, where he again showed what he already showed on our program, what will be the effect on Germany if it ever comes to a war. You know, namely not triggered by Russia, because he also makes the point that the Russian military is absolutely not in a position of capacity to attack all of Europe. Remember that the military budget of NATO is 10 times of that of Russia. You know, I mean, the only kind of war which is thinkable is a nuclear war. And if it comes to exchange of nuclear weapons in Europe, Germany will be annihilated. And there are many people in Germany right now, not enough, but is a significant number of people who wake up to that. And just since Monday, since, you know, this whole new parliament is being seated, there are many people in Europe who now are really scared. They are shocked. They are horrified how this coup could happen. Many people are talking about a coup. Maybe it's not legally a coup, but it has resemblance of a coup. Namely, you know, that Merz turned around by 180 degrees and just needed 1 day to break his promise. He loosened the debt brake, which would have been legitimate and actually economically wise if it would have been done to relaunch the physical economy. But to do that for a war economy, I mean, I think we have a super mega crisis, and the more people wake up to that effect, the better.
Someone asked, do you have an update on the progress of the U.S.-Russian talks? Are they moving ahead?
Well, that's the only good part one can report about the present strategic picture. There were these discussions in Riyadh, and it seems that they made progress on a whole bunch of points, including, you know, that the Black Sea shipping will be protected, that they agreed not to use military civilian ships for military purposes, and that there will be an agreement. There is an agreement between Russia and Ukraine not to attack energy infrastructure, which, by the way, was just violated by Ukraine again, but the Russian side decided to not respond to that, obviously in order to try to move this agreement forward. But the fact that there is some dialogue going on, that's about the only positive thing one can report. But I think all the other deployments, which we discussed before, are directed to deroot this progress between the US and Russia in particular.
From a farmer in Texas, I don't want my tax dollars to pay for killing Palestinian children in Gaza. My friends say Israel controls the U.S. through the Zionist lobby. Is that true? And do they control President Trump?
But unfortunately, you know, it is, I think that as much as one can support President Trump's policy in the effort to reconcile the diplomatic discourse with Russia, which I think is absolutely crucial given the fact that this is between the two largest nuclear powers. But I think the situation in the Middle East is terrible. The fact that President Trump was convinced to bomb Yemen is terrible because what came from the Houthis was in reaction to the renewed attack by the IDF on Gaza. The IDF has renewed the ground troop offensive. More than 1,000 people have been killed, more than mostly women and children, and it seems that there is now the beginning of the what is attempted to be the final relocation of all the Palestinians. So the Houthis, reacted to that, and I mean, what Trump should have done is what he did in the first place when he forced Netanyahu to impose the ceasefire. But Netanyahu had been clear the whole time that he would never agree to phase 2 of the ceasefire, and that is now being carried out. And I think Trump is about to get himself, the United States, and the whole world into a war with Iran. And if that happens, then I think whatever progress he has made with Russia could be undone in the shortest of period of time. So I think that the answer to this farmer is unfortunately, I think the influence in the United States of these forces is too big, and it does require a mobilization of the population against it.
Well, I would urge him to make sure he joins the International Peace Coalition call on Friday, where this is continuing to meet every single week, and he can have his voice heard and hear what else is being said. But Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we'll have the next call of the International Peace Coalition. Now, I have a question that came from someone who is a banker who asked, do you think anything positive can come from this initiative to make Bitcoin a part of the U.S. Federal Reserve System?
No, and if you want to look what happens, you look at Argentina, where you had a complete collapse of this speculative bubble. The Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and so-called stable currencies, these are all efforts to have credit generation, money creation outside of the control of parliaments and budgets. It is a completely speculative private effort, and it is going against anything what the theory of American physical economics, the American system, says. Now, I think it's very problematic because it seems that Trump Jr. is involved in some of these Bitcoin operations, and I think nothing positive can come out whatsoever. And I can only warn anybody who thinks they can get rich quick in putting your savings into this. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Earlier, when we were talking about Yemen, the question comes up about this so-called DOD, Department of Defense call, which had a journalist, in fact, a very notorious journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg, on. So we have a question. Someone wrote in, I'm very suspicious. What do you think is the real story about Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic magazine being added to the call of the Department of Defense officials when they were supposedly discussing the bombing of Yemen?
Well, I think this so-called signal gate is obviously designed to cause trouble in the cabinet of Trump to eventually get Waltz out. I think there should be a serious investigation of who is this aide, how was this set up? It looks to me like a real setup. And, it seems now that the argument that no top secret information was revealed may not hold up, given the fact that the exact timing of the air attacks on Yemen was discussed. So that would be clearly a sign of serious intelligence being leaked. I think it smells like, that this could be a real British designed operation of the Five Eyes as a counter to, Trump is trying to go after the deep state and shut down a lot of these operations. And here they create a typical trap to try to counter that. And I think that's what it is, and that should be investigated.
Max Blumenthal reported today that Jeffrey Goldberg was recruited initially into politics by Meir Kahane, the extremist rabbi terrorist from the Jewish Defense League, and actually was in the Israel Defense Forces for a period of time as a prison guard. And now he ends up as a top writer for the Atlantic magazine. So I think that gets at this whole question of your point that it's a setup. Now we have a question from Thomas B., who asks, to have an economic recovery program for the United States, wouldn't Trump have to take power away from the London and Wall Street banks? I don't see him doing that. Is there any chance of a Glass-Steagall policy?
Well, I think the questioner is completely right. I don't see Trump doing it either, and also Glass-Steagall would be the absolute necessary first step. But I think given the complexity of the strategic situation, given the extreme danger in which we are right now, the point I have been making now since 3 years is becoming more urgent by the hour, and that is that we absolutely have to initiate a completely different approach, namely to set up an international security and development architecture discussion. I wrote 10 principles for such a discussion in Glass-Steagall is just one element in that, but I think given the fact that we are in a really in a showdown time of total danger, I think that one Glass-Steagall is not enough. You need to put the entire package on the table. And I can only hope that, between ongoing efforts, from China, the 3 initiatives, Putin's mention of the potential for a global security system, that is being promoted, because what you see right now is a real counteroffensive. For example, all the BRICS countries are targeted by financial warfare. Indonesia, you have capital flight, so they had to basically use the central bank to intervene. And the supposed argument is that Indonesia would spend too much money on school luncheons and pregnant women. Now, this is incredible. This is a sovereign country. Indonesia is very important. It could become the 3rd largest economy in no time. It's an important new member of the BRICS. You have a similar attack on Brazil, on South Africa, on Egypt. And I think that this is really, one gets almost the feeling that we are entering the eye of the storm very fast. And that's why I think one has to take a completely different approach and think of, if right now, for example, a group of countries would insist to put such a global security and development architecture as a war avoidance means on the agenda, for example, in the UN General Assembly, it could wake up the world to how the danger is, and it would take the ability of the imperialist faction to manipulate each conflict up to the point of it boiling over. It would eliminate that possibility. And that's my deepest conviction.
Now we have a question from, again, from the UK. Do you have any opinion on the assisted suicide bill that's going to be introduced in the British Parliament this week?
I was not aware of that bill, but there is no question that once you move into the direction of financial fascism, and that is what this rearmament drive is, because when you resort to financing in the tradition of Hjalmar Schacht, that you create outside of the budget monies to finance armament, that eventually will go along with massive cuts in the social area, with brutal austerity. And, as we have seen 80 years ago, euthanasia becomes then an economic reason. Or there is an economic reason for euthanasia. You want to reduce the cost of the health system. And we see this all over the place. We see a cutting down of the health system in the United States, in France, in Germany, in Italy. and I have not even looked at all the other countries in detail, but I know it from these so-called larger countries in Europe that they're closing down hospitals. Then there's naturally many reasons that because of the, cutting off the budgets, not enough nurses and specialists are there. So I think that this completely fits the fascist profile, and people better look at what happened 80 years ago to in time mobilize against it.
Now, Helga, I have one more question from you. Someone writes in and said, 42 years ago last Friday was the famous speech by Ronald Reagan announcing the Strategic Defense Initiative that was the policy of your husband, and that your husband traveled all over the world with you to promote. So he writes, now Trump is talking about some kind of missile defense system. What would Lyndon do today?
Well, he would for sure involve the idea in the present beginning dialogue between Trump and Putin to put a joint missile defense on the table by, I mean, what people don't realize is that this whole proposal, which became the SDI, was not what the media said about it. It was not Star Wars. It was not an effort to just use kinetic energies to, basically off-the-shelf technologies, but it was meant as a joint research program whereby American and at that time Soviet and now Russian scientists would develop these new technologies together, implement these systems together in a complete trust-building way. Nowadays, you obviously would have to involve all the other nuclear powers in some fashion, especially the Chinese. So it's probably more complicated today, but I think this idea, I mean, it's very positive that Trump has talked about that he wants to halve all of nuclear weapons, and at one point he even said he wants to get rid of it, and he made some vague reference to President Reagan saying he didn't have the technology yet. So that implies that maybe, Russian and American scientists at least have some idea where to go, which, Putin has demonstrated with the various hypersonic programs, which he announced on the 1st of March in 2018 already, and more recently the Oreshnik missile. But to inject that as a confidence-building measure of joint collaboration, joint research, and jointly developing these systems is absolutely required.
And of course, that could also apply to the space program, a joint space program. And there have been some articles in the Executive Intelligence Review recently on the science of the Strategic Defense Initiative. So Helga, the last question is, we have the International Peace Coalition meeting again this Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. What's on the schedule?
Well, we will for sure discuss the crisis in the Middle East. We will have specialists and experts from India, from Iran, from Israel, from Palestine. So that will be one big complex. And as the war clouds are gathering over the region in an unprecedented way, if you want to know the up-to-date expert view, come in on Friday. And naturally, the situation with Ukraine and the armament and the strategic developments between the US and Russia and the Europeans, I mean, I can only say if Lavrov, who is without any question one of the most, trusted and experienced diplomats the world has right now, if he starts to use a language like that, what the Europeans are doing is in the tradition of Napoleon and Hitler, I mean, this is not said lightly. People better wake up and hear these warnings, because, you can see how we are moving step by step towards a catastrophe out of which, if it goes wrong, nobody would come out alive. And we will try to increase the peace coalition. So invite all your colleagues, your your friends, your family members watch this, participate in it, because we have to build a real peace movement, which is right now, not strong enough. On this coming Saturday, we will have major demonstrations in Germany, in Wiesbaden, I think in Berlin, in other places. So this is on Saturday. So come to the IPC on Friday and think about participating any demonstration you can on Saturday, because we have to really get a change in the present course before it is too late.
Okay, well, Helga, thank you for joining us today, and I'm sure everyone will want to be with you on Friday to discuss this question further. So thanks again.
Yes, till Friday, I hope.